In terms of Syria, over the last period, we've written 7 reports, 2 briefings. Our research has documented targeted attacks, death in custody, persecution by Syrian intelligence forces of activists abroad. We've seen Syrian embassies persecute Syrian activists outside of Syria, and we've mobilized our activists and had demonstrations outside Syrian embassies in many parts of the world. We have seen and heard of deaths in custody, persecution by Syrian intelligence forces, and violations, torture, and other ill treatment. We've issued more than 80 urgent actions. That's where we mobilise our members to take action for particular individuals that we know are at risk. And that work is absolutely important and will continue. And in all of that, we've been getting our information through a network of local contacts, through in-depth interviews with hundreds of refugees and others who have fled the country, through journalists and through accounts and reports of local activists. And after many months of doing our work in that way, we decided that we really needed to assure ourselves that our assessments were as accurate and impartial as possible. And so we decided that we would enter Syria, despite the fact that we've had repeated refusals from the Syrian government to allow us into that country. So very unusually for us as Amnesty, we very seldom enter countries clandestinely, but in the case of Syria, we decided that to ensure that the evidence that we were collecting, and evidence that we very much hope will be brought in front of a court not too long from now to bring Assad and his regime to book, we decided that we would enter Syria. And so very brave researchers were in Syria the first time in April this year, gathering evidence and some very harrowing testimony from our research missions. So just to share some of that testimony with you, our researcher was told by one parent, "Soldiers came to our home and took my son. Later, as I was peering out of the window, I saw soldiers line up 8 young men standing facing the wall with their hands tied at the back and shoot them. Then they put the bodies in the back of a pickup truck and they left. I don't know if the men were all dead or injured. At that point, I did not know that one of the men was my son. His body was found with the other bodies at a school not too far from our home." A relative of another man who was also killed that day told our researcher, "Members of the military security came to the house of our relatives where we were staying and asked for our ID and did not find any problem. We were not wanted. Then one of the soldiers looked at my relative's cell phone and found a pro-revolution song. They took him outside. A neighbour told me the soldiers had shot him and then taken him to a nearby house. I went there and I found him injured. He'd been shot in the ear and neck, but was still breathing. Some neighbours helped to carry him to the car, and 3 of them took him to a field hospital." That's a field hospital because normal hospitals have long been out of bounds in Syria to people who have been shot or injured by the security forces. But on the way there, they were stopped by soldiers and they were killed. Their bodies were later found at a school, except the body of my relative who had been taken back to the house where he had previously been left for dead. They had finished him off with an additional shot to the head. These are the accounts of relatives of victims and witnesses of extrajudicial executions carried out by the Syrian government security forces in the city of Idlib on the 16th of April. And they only agreed to talk to our researcher and speak on condition that their names and any details that could identify them wouldn't be published. Others, whom our researcher was able to reach, said they couldn't speak as the danger of retaliation against them and their families was just far too great. So to say that the majority of families of victims and eyewitnesses are scared is absolutely an understatement. The people that our researchers met were literally terrified. In 10 days in Aleppo in the north of Syria in August, our researchers witnessed a barrage of air and artillery strikes by Syrian government forces in different parts of the city. They investigated 30 attacks in which 80 civilians were killed. Almost all of the attacks were on residential neighbourhoods. These were absolutely war crimes operating where civilians were absolutely being targeted. None of these victims were directly involved in the conflict. And our researcher reported on her time in Aleppo her research is full of the names of children who were killed. And these attacks absolutely amount to war crimes. And at Amnesty, we look forward to the day where we can bring our evidence into the appropriate courts. Schools, hospitals, homes, all places of safety destroyed by airstrikes. And as the city struggles with a shortage of bread, families have been killed queuing outside bakeries. 16-year-old Dalia Hamdan and her 17-year-old brother fled their home to seek shelter in a school, thinking they would be safe. On the 5th of August, they were killed when an aircraft swooped down and fired several rockets.